People have been asking for a shop tour, so today I thought I would take a look around. Let's start with the outside of the shop. The main shop is the one that's behind me right now, or on my right side as we walk through here. The little shop, the hand tool shop, is going to be on the left side. The shipping container right in front of us is just a place for excess storage. It's got nuts, bolts, rivets, hardware, tools that aren't being used, all that kind of stuff in there. And it's surprisingly full of stuff that maybe I need to get rid of one of these days. Now behind the little shop, there's a storage rack that has a lot of the little cutoffs and the scrappy bits that used to be in the buckets, much better organized on the rack, even though it's not real well organized on the rack. And of course, there are still a few buckets left over. As we come around the end of the little shop, this is where my main stock rack is. This is all mild steel, it's longer pieces. And I can pull a pickup up here and unload when I come back from the steel yard. So it's a pretty convenient place to keep it. It does get rained on and snowed on, but it doesn't seem to be a problem. There's stock on the rack from 1/8 inch to 1.25 inches, and in varying widths from 1/2 to maybe 3 inches, depending on what the material is. I generally try to buy more than I need when I buy material, and some of this has been on here for maybe 10 years, but it was way cheaper when I bought it back then than it would be to replace it now if I need it, so I'm glad I have it on hand. There's another little shelf here with various small items, some railroad spikes, unfinished hinges, some round discs that'll be good for some candle holder projects I have coming up in the future. And it's just a little bit more organized than the one in the back. This other big shelf here is all material that should be hardenable in one way or the other, but it's mostly repurposed. A lot of it's unknown. There's leaf springs, coil springs, jackhammer bits, bearings, just whatever it is that should be hardenable material that I can use for some future purpose. Now as we come into the little shop, we come into this first corner. This has a little workbench, used to be in the basement wood shop. Got a little cabinet here that doesn't have much in it. It's just something we picked up in an antique store years ago. Thought it was interesting. I don't think we paid very much for it. Isn't a very practical cabinet, but this is a good spot for it, and I'm sure it'll get filled up before long. Mostly this gets used as a place where I can set cameras and microphones and batteries, things like that, while I'm working on videos in the shop, because this is otherwise pretty much an unused part of the shop, so that stuff's out of my way. I do have a big battery bank here, and this is enough power to run the video lights, charge the cordless tools, and hopefully run an electric blower of the forge, which I haven't got installed yet, but I hope to do that sometime this week. And with the battery bank, then I don't have to run any power, don't have to run an extension cord over here. I can just carry this over to the main shop, plug it in about once every 2 or 3 weeks, maybe once a month, and that gives me all the power I need in this little shop. That brings us over here to the forging area. This is, of course, the heart of any shop. There's the coal forge. This used to be over in the main shop, but it's now over here where it can be used anytime I want to without changing my layout in the main shop. I've got a little gas forge over here. It really comes in handy in this little shop if I just need to do small stuff. In fact, sometimes if I just need a little stuff, I'll come use this gas forge instead of the big gas forge in the main shop. Eventually, I think I will replace this with another small forge, but a higher quality small forge, just to see if there's really a benefit to the more expensive ones. I'm experimenting with a little overhead hood on the coal forge to see if that helps this draft a little bit better. This is pretty good, but if you get a little too much green coal in the forge, you can create more smoke than it wants to pull. And I'm hoping this little eyebrow, or whatever you want to call it, will help take care of some of that. There's a hand crank blower over here, but I'm hoping to replace that with the electric blower. This is just a little bit more than I want to deal with, especially when I'm trying to make videos. Yeah, you can really see why the lighting is a problem in this little shop. But anyways, we got about a 250-pound anvil. This is an old anvil one of the viewers donated to the channel, and it is just the perfect anvil for this little shop. I have a 5-inch post vise. This is one that used to be over in the main shop, and it's on a portable stand. Even though the stand weighs about 500 pounds, I can still wiggle this vise. So eventually I will probably set a post in the ground here. Next to the vise, there's some tool storage. That'll be filled up before long. We'll need to find another way to store tools. And I have a heavy workbench over here. This is probably about 5-inch thick timbers. And this is a good place for doing the handwork, staging materials. There is not a steel workbench in this shop. There's no place for doing any welding, anything like that. I don't have a welder in here. I could stretch a cord, I suppose, if I had to weld in here. But that's not what this shop is about. This shop is more about doing handwork at the anvil and good bench work. It's really not about welding, grinding, things like that. So I think this will be sufficient bench space in this little shop. This is my only window. All the other light comes from the main door. If you saw the window on the other side of the shop, that one's blocked off and the steel rack's on the other side of it. So it wouldn't be much of a window even if you could see out of it. There's a 4-inch Rock Island vise I picked up at the Rocky Mountain Smiths Conference last year. There's a little wood stove that'll provide some supplemental heat. Of course, that'll be better once I get the doors on the shop. Janet also uses this stove sometimes for dyeing yarn that she then uses in her blanket weaving. Now let's go over and take a look at the main shop. Now this outer area of the main shop is mostly the stuff that creates dust and grit and things like that. This is where I do most of my cutting and grinding. So right behind me here is a Marvel bandsaw. This is an old saw, 3-phase, has to have a phase converter because I don't have 3-phase power, but it will run kind of automatically. You can set it and walk away from it and it will self-feed through the material. So it's a handy saw for production work. It isn't a good saw for regular bandsaw kind of work where you might actually have to follow a pattern or something. But for a cutoff saw that you don't have to be around, it works pretty well. Just about any of the horizontal bandsaws out there would work just as well. They're just not quite as cool as the Marvel saw. Then I have the Evolution cold saw, which uses a carbide tooth blade. It's good for mild steel. I don't cut tool steels, especially tool steels that might be hardened. Occasionally, if I'm sure the material's annealed, I'll cut it, and it does a pretty good job. But I keep the abrasive chop saw on hand just in case I need it for tool steels like an old axle shaft or a leaf spring that are hardened, and I don't want to cut those on the cold saw. I have an Edwards No. 5 shear. We've seen this in a lot of videos in the past. This is good for anything from about 1/8 inch to 1/2 inch, at least 1/2 inch square. It'll cut 5/8 square, but it's a whole lot of work to do it that way. This doesn't require any electricity. I put new blades in it when I bought it about 30 years ago. These blades will probably last longer than I will, and that means this is a zero-cost item to use, and I didn't pay that much for it in the first place. I've been through about 6 chop saws since then, and probably 100 blades in the chop saws. So economically, the Edwards shear is the best thing if it'll cut the material that I need to cut. The chili forge is just parked out here. That way I can bring it back into the shop if I need it for something. It's still a good forge and I'm still perfectly happy to use it. It just doesn't have room in the shop right now. Next to it, there's an old grinder motor with a wire wheel on one side and a composite wheel on the other side. Now, I didn't do any cleaning of this shop before we started this video, so you're just seeing what a shambles it can be in from day-to-day work, and things tend to get piled up in the spaces I'm not using all the time. But behind this stuff, there's a dental lathe. This is a slow-speed, essentially a grinder motor. I don't know why they call it a lathe. And it will take various attachments. It takes the same kind of things that go in a die grinder, so any of my die grinder bits can go in here and allow me to hold the material instead of holding the tool. On this back bench, I have 2 2x72 belt grinders. This is an old Wilton square wheel that is well used, but is still a good performing grinder. It's a real workhorse, but it is not variable speed. The KMG grinder is variable speed, has a lot more attachment, is a lot more versatile grinder. So I really am glad to have both of those. Back in the corner, there's a little storage rack that holds all the arms for the KMG, so you can just see some of the attachments that are available for it. There are a lot more possibilities than what I have. This is just some of what's available for a 2x72 grinder these days. Then we come to a Baldor buffer. This is a regular buffer runs slower than a grinder, so it's a much safer unit to run. And I have some loose buffs on there. I use coarse grit on one side and a finer grit on the other side. And then the big belt grinder. This big belt grinder uses 3 by 135 inch belts, I think it is. This is one a friend of mine made. He kind of inherited all of the parts and all of the belts. And after he built it, he realized he just really wasn't going to use it that much. So I was able to buy it from him with all the belts, and I'll bet you I never use up all the belts. Next to the door where we came in, I have my heat treat oven. This used to be in the main shop, but I moved it out here because I was running out of room in there, and there's a little bit better ventilation out here. So this is not a bad place to have this. Just before we go into the main part of the shop, there's this massive old drill press. Somebody was going to haul that to the scrap yard, so I was able to save it and put it in here. At this point, it's mostly in my way, and I would like to get it out of the shop, except that it is bigger than the door and heavier than I want to try and mess with, so I'm not sure what I'm going to do. If anybody wants it, knows how to get it out of here, it's free. That then brings us into the main shop area. This is where I do most of the work. This actually has a door I can close to keep some of the warmth in during the day if I'm working in the winter. Now somebody will want to know that outer room was 20 feet from the door to the back wall where the grinders is, and 12 feet from this door to the far side where the heat treat oven is sitting. This main part of the shop is about 20 feet wide by 24 feet long. Originally, it was 12 feet wide, 16 feet long, and it's been added on to a little bit here, a little bit over there, and it's grown a little over the years to accommodate any new tools and new ways that I want to work. I don't think I'm ever going to add any more room to this shop. I'm kind of tired of adding on. There's a lot of things that have never been finished, and I'd rather get stuff finished than keep adding on to the roof line. Speaking of the roof leaks. I've got skylights in here. Really did like the light in here, but skylights do what they usually do, and they leak around them. There are a couple of other roof leaks because the roof was made with salvaged material, and it's not the best job in the world. I thought this was going to be a temporary shop originally, and I wasn't really all that worried about it. And now that it's become pretty permanent, and I kind of like the space, I think I need to replace the roof. But I don't know if I'm going to have time or the funds to do that this year. But I think it needs to be stripped off, take the skylights out, frame those openings in, put down new underlayment and new roofing material. Ideally, I'd like to hire a roofer to do that. And as soon as I can afford to do that, I'll probably take a look at that. But I'm afraid by the time the job is done, it'd be $5,000 or $10,000. But once that's done, I'd be able to insulate the roof and put some sort of a ceiling in here that would hopefully reflect light better for the videos, but also protect the insulation. It's really important, especially if you have paper-faced insulation, which is pretty common. That could be a problem in a shop with lots of sparks. But anyways, that's the next big improvement on the building itself. Then it'd be much more comfortable to work in here during the winter. But enough about that. Eventually that'll get done. Let's start at the door and work our way around the shop so it kind of makes some sense and you get an idea what the layout is. Now in the little shop, we went counterclockwise around the shop. So let's do that here so you get a better idea what the layout is. So this is the door coming in from the outer shop. Let me turn the camera here. I've got a little grinder mounted on the wall here for sharpening drill bits. I don't know that it's any better than using the belt grinder, but it does work for that. I got a locker where I put all the cool stickers that people send me, and it's full of video related stuff. So it's got camera mounts, clamping arms, light stands, extra lights, battery chargers, cables, all that kind of stuff is in here. A few years ago, I had an old metal lathe that sat in this spot, and I liked having the lathe, but I really didn't use it much. I really never learned how to use it very well, and I ended up giving it back to the person that I'd bought it from because he had way more use for it than I did. I replaced it with some really nice storage. This is just a big roll-off toolbox from one of the home centers. It's not real well organized up here, but it gives me a place to charge all of my batteries for all the cordless tools where things stay out of the dust. And of course, all the usual stuff for wrenches, screwdrivers, pliers, then all the cordless tools in the bottom drawers. One side has some bigger drawers that I keep accessories for the welder in, and all the things to make coils for the induction forge are all stored in here. This was a huge step towards getting better organized in the shop, and I get way better use out of this than I ever did the lathe. So I'm glad I invested in this piece of equipment. From there, I have my big work table. We kind of looked at this when we did the video on the new platen table, but this is a 4x8 table. It's at a really nice height for work that does not involve heavy hammering, things like that. It would not be ergonomic if you got a hammer, especially if you're setting rivets or something. It's a little bit too high for that, but it's great for doing sketches. Good height for welding on, good height for a lot of other things. And with the addition of the platen table, I put my Beverly shear back on here and my Whitney punch because they get used a lot more if they're bolted to a good solid table than if I got to dig them out of whatever corner they're in, put them on the table, and then clamp them down. This way they're set up, ready to go, and they get a lot more use this way. So it's a good side effect of having the platen table as a place to do other work. Then I feel like I can afford to take up the space on this table with these tools. I also mounted a little vise to the other end where I do most of my welding over here. In fact, I've got another new place to weld back over here we'll take a look at in a minute. It's always good to have more vices in the shop. It's amazing how handy it is to have a vise in different locations. This is also where my welder goes. Now, previously I've had a Lincoln Ranger engine-driven welder, sat outside, had to run cables in, go out and start the gas engine to be able to weld. Really a nice unit, but since we've got power in this shop, I don't really need it. That dated from when I didn't have a shop with power in at our old house, and that was the only way I could run power hammers or welders, anything like that. I had to have gas power to do that. But this little multi-process inverter welder does everything I need to do, takes up less space, it's less hassle, and as a result, I'm more likely to use it and fabricate the little things or make new jigs, tools, things like that, than I was when I had to go out and start the big gas engine. Then I have another new splurge in the shop. When I was looking at the platen table and thought I was going to have to put a bigger platen table where my big table is and take the big table out of the shop, I thought I wanted a better welding table. So I bought the Fireball Tools Dragon Wagon. This is the smallest, most affordable of the options in their welding tables. And I thought that was going to be really a necessary thing if I replaced the big table with a platen table, because I'd have less workspace and I wouldn't want to commit to welding on that table if that was my big work table. Something like that. I hope that makes sense. Then I decided to buy the smaller platen table and keep the big table, so this was not really as necessary as I thought it might be. But I'll tell you what, this is really handy. To be able to have all the fixtures and the little fences and the clamps and everything that goes with a table like this really makes it easier to set stuff up when I need to do little welding projects, little fabrication projects. So even though I regret the money to some extent, I'm really glad to have the table. A few months from now, the pain of spending that money will fade and the table will still be here. So I'm going to be really glad to have it. It's a nice addition to the shop. Not sponsored by Fireball Tools. He just makes some really good stuff. A junky storage shelf on this wall and a front door that I never use because it's an old door and it's starting to sag and it binds. So that's something I need to work on this year, is getting that door fixed. I want to make some nice ornamental corner brackets that go on the inside that hold it once I've got it fixed so it doesn't sag again. And then I need to put this window grill up on there. This is one I've had for that door. I probably finished this grill 10 or 15 years ago, and it really needs to get put up. So I'm hoping to get that done this year, along with repairing the door, so I can actually use the front door of the shop more. Doing too much talking, my throat's starting to get dry. That brings us into really the main work area of the shop. This is where the forge, the anvil, power hammer is. On this back wall, I've got twisting wrenches and tool storage, tongs, hammers, all that kind of stuff. And I have my torch set up with a gas saver so that when you hang it up, it shuts the gas flow off. I've got one for oxyacetylene, one for oxypropane. The oxygen and the acetylene bottles are back over here. Propane is plumbed in from the big yard tank out in the yard. I got a 500-gallon propane tank out in the yard. And it's been over a year since I've had to fill that propane tank, so that's really convenient and efficient to buy propane that way. In fact, it's delivered. I don't have to go get it. This is a Dark Star ribbon burner forge. I never got around to building my own ribbon burner, so I ordered one from somebody that looked like they were doing a good job. This is really a nice forge. It is a workhorse. It's lined with hard fire bricks so that it takes a long time to heat up, but it's really durable, and in doing production work, this has been fantastic. For a lot of the smaller stuff, I could have gotten by with their smaller model of forge. This is overkill for most of what I do, but for those few times where you need a bigger forge, it's kind of nice to have one. One of the downsides to propane forges is the fact that no one forge fits everything, so you end up with an assortment of forges over the years. But that also makes them a more viable option. So next to the ribbon burner forge, I have the induction forge. This is a tool that I'm really glad to have. I was curious about these for years. Finally picked one up a couple of years ago, and it is really handy. I'm finding I'm using it more and more, and the more I learn how I can heat things that I didn't think would fit in the coils, but if you use a little ingenuity, you can still manage to get it hot, the better this becomes. It is also the lowest cost heating option that I have in the shop. So the more I can use the induction forge, the more money I save. Got a 460-pound Fontanini anvil. It's a double horn anvil with a side face and an upsetting block. Wonderful anvil, can't recommend it enough. I'm really glad I got this anvil. I have the Kank of Ice back here. This is a new manufactured leg vise. This is one Blacksmith Supply sent us, and it has been a very good vise. Glad to have it. It holds better than my old vise. I wish it was a little heavier, just because as a blacksmith, we tend to value heavy, solid tools more than we value lightweight tools. I don't know if that's a character flaw or if that's good logic, but that's just kind of the way I think about it. I would really like to have a vise that was as precise as this one is, holds as well as this one is, but was a little bit more substantial. This is a tool cabinet. I think we've taken a close look at this before. I'll link to a video about it up here if you want to see more about the tool cabinet. This is a homemade hydraulic press. It runs on a 2 horsepower motor, and I run the pump at half speed, so it's a slower speed motor, 1800 RPM motor, something like that. And it runs at half speed, which gives you a little bit more control, and you're not as likely to screw something up really fast with it. But being slow, it also cools the material down some. And now I'm kind of wishing I'd gone with the full speed 5-horse motor, which would also have required me to make a new wiring run, because I don't have an outlet that would run the 5-horse motor. I did have an outlet that would run the 2-horse motor. So this was easier, more cost-effective to build, but I do wish I had the higher speed pump on it now, because I don't use it as much as I thought I would, just because of that prolonged contact with the material. Cools the material off too fast, and if you're trying to punch with it, it heats the punch up too much, and then your punches start to lose shape. So if you're building a hydraulic press, going with a slower speed may not be the best idea. Back in the corner, I got a lot of tool storage, and the 25-pound Little Giant. That's actually Janet's Little Giant hammer. That's one we bought for her. Even though she doesn't do any blacksmithing anymore, still her hammer. Then there's the 60-kilogram Samac self-contained air hammer. This has probably been the biggest game changer I ever put in the shop. This thing really speeds up my production work. Things that used to be barely profitable have become very profitable since putting this hammer in. I wish I could have afforded to put this in my shop many years earlier, and I don't have any regrets about this hammer whatsoever. Then I come to my Clay Spencer style inline treadle hammer. This is another one of those tools that I find indispensable. I don't use it all the time, but there's so much that this tool will do that I think if I were starting over again and could only afford one of the big tools, this would be the first one I would buy. Even though the power hammer really makes me money, I think this is a tool I would not be without in my shop. And if I ever have to downsize to a smaller shop, the treadle hammer will definitely go, and there may not be room for a power hammer. And I have a number 6 fly press. This is the fly press that I think is currently being sold by Blacksmith Supply, the same version of fly press. They have it in different sizes. Another tool I'm really glad to have. In some ways, I wish I had found a much bigger fly press instead of building the hydraulic press. There are fly presses many times bigger than this. I've seen several for sale lately. If I didn't have a hydraulic press, I might seriously take a look at one. Of course, they also would not fit under my roof line. This one just barely fits under the roof line, and those others are a lot taller. So it'd have to sit somewhere else in the shop, and I don't know if I have room for that. But a fly press is really handy. Non-electric, don't need any power, doesn't need hydraulic fluid. There's no danger of a hose blowing out or anything like that. So a fly press is a pretty nice tool. I have a second anvil in the shop here that I use a lot for layout work if I'm center punching things to go to the drill press. It's easier to do it over here if I'm doing my measuring, marking, and cold work, things like that. I use this anvil. Just like the little giant power hammer, this really belongs to Janet. She just lets me use it. This is the oldest workbench in the shop. When this was just the 12 by 16 version of the shop, this was the only workbench I had in here. I had a leg vise mounted to it then, and that was the only vise I had in the shop at that point. So this bench has been around a while, but it's where we sit and talk at the beginning and the end of the videos. It's where I do a lot of the bench work, filing, things like that. And I've replaced the leg vise with this big 6-inch Wilton vise. Back here on this wall, I have a wooden bench that I thought I was going to use for most of my bench work. I used to have a couple of bench vises on there, but I found I always came back to this bench. So that's just kind of a staging area. It's a place I can put things. The portaband lives over there. All my files are on a rack on the wall. When I put the windows in there, that was outside. That was one of those additions that went on there. But I still kind of like having the windows there. It just looks good. And this bench gets used a lot just as a place to put the parts so they don't take up space on this bench. Horizontal surfaces may attract clutter, but you got to have a place to put that stuff somewhere, so you might as well have lots of horizontal surfaces. Now we'll talk about what's back here in just a minute. We'll just finish the tour over here. One more thing, well, 2 more things. There's a little wood stove here, and while it seems like a small stove for this shop space, it's amazing how much nicer it makes it in here to work. Just having this stove going in the winter, especially if I'm working around here doing bench work. If I'm working at the forge at the anvil, there's plenty of heat coming from the forge, and I don't really need the wood stove at that point. But the last big tool in the shop is my drill press. It just sits over here in the corner where it's out of the way. And a drill press is one of those tools that you may be able to get by without if you have a hand drill and if you're comfortable punching holes. But once you have a drill press in your shop, you'll probably never want to be without one. Now I hesitate to show you this back room. It's mostly a dumping ground right now. This is something that I started ages ago so that I would have a little clean place to put my coat and my cameras, maybe bring the laptop down here if I needed to do emails or look at somebody's design they had sent me. Kind of an office space and a place to go and relax. But it's been unfinished forever, and I don't know when I'll ever get it finished. Hopefully this year I'll get back to work on it. There really isn't a lot left to do. It's just a matter of time. And this space in this door is where I want to put a gate inspired by some of the work of Samuel Yellen. That's a project that I think might take me a year or 2 years, but I'm hoping to get started on it this year. Right now there's probably more junk stored back here than anything else, but this upper section here is done with can and bottle wall. When it's all done, the cans will be covered and the bottles will still allow light through, kind of give it a little stained glass effect. A little bit more over here. This is where I'll actually have a desk, is in this corner, kind of where all the trash is right now. That little can wall down there will actually be a little box where I can put batteries for solar power, so I can have some more solar power. Again, this is where a lot of stuff just gets dumped. I need to make a dump run and get rid of all the left from when the fireball table arrived. It came in a lot of boxes. The lower walls are actually made out of tires filled with rammed earth. So the whole thing is kind of based on the Earthship idea that you find around Taos, New Mexico. There are quite a few of those there. And while it's not really any big philosophical thing on my part, I just like that look. I like the look of the adobe walls and the little bit of light coming through the bottle areas. And I think it's really going to be a nice place to go relax in the middle of the workday when you need to take a break, or when you do need to do some of that little office stuff while you're in the shop. So that's a shop tour of the main shop and the little hand tool shop. I want to thank my channel members and my Patreon patrons for providing financial support for the videos here at Black Bear Forge. Both channel members and Patreon patrons receive early access videos, and then the Patreon patrons also get those videos ad-free and as much as possible sponsor-free. But for everybody, thank you for stopping by. Thank you for spending this time with me. Hope you have time in your day to get out to your shop. Make something, but stay safe. Wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next video.